In this video, we're going to conclude this overview of the interface in 3D Coach by covering the toolbar, the menu bar, presets panel, and the preferences panel. Okay, so there's a lot to cover. We're not going to go in great detail in each of these features because there's a lot to touch on. It would probably take all day to do that. Alright, so starting with interpolate. This is basically steady stroke or a lazy mouse type feature. With that checked, let me uncheck it first. Create a new layer and just quickly show, oops, let me turn on color, turn everything else off. Okay, and I may or may not have a steady hand. Oops. Now if I check interpolate, the default value is 8, so I've got it cranked up to 20. And you can see the little trail, at least behind. It tries to do, just as the name implies, interpolates between point A and point B. All right. I'm going to make sure I uncheck that if I'm not using it. Invert tool action is the same as holding the control key. And the little mouse or stylus icon, if you're using a Wacom stylus or something with pen pressure, you want to enable these. You can also edit curves, create a curve to affect how the pen pressure is applied to these settings. All right, fall off, self-explanatory. On your brush, sometimes you may want a soft edge. Sometimes you may want a hard edge, such as using bolts, nuts, rivets, things like that. With each layer in the paint room, you have a depth channel, a color channel, and a specularity channel, and you can turn them on and off at will at any point in time to work with just those enabled channels. You can hover over the little icon here to adjust the depth, smoothing, and they're much the same as these here in the toolbar. But additive painting, basically this will stack relief on top of what you've already painted. If you uncheck that, it will try to blend as you cross something you've already painted. Okay, color, obviously you adjust the opacity, same function as here, but you can use current color, use randomly one of the two colors, your foreground, background, and use random color between the two. Specularity, self-explanatory. Just know that when you are painting specularity, it's not so much dependent upon the color, but the level of specularity. So if you want subtle specularity as you're painting, then you need a lower number. If you want greater amounts of specularity, obviously increase it. Okay, so up here toward the top, many of these are self-explanatory, except just know that more in cavity is allowing you to paint with cavity, and less in cavity is painting on the heights. So let me go ahead and hit X, choose more, or I'm sorry, less in cavity, and choose a regular brush alpha. And now I want to check the cavity scale. Okay, so that's not helping me much. I'm going to undo, bring this down a bit. And so it will treat normal matte relief just as if it was real displacement, real mesh displacement. So if I use more in cavity and crank the value up and hit X to swap to a darker color, okay, and you can see that begin to work here. You can see how that works. Less on current color, more on current color, and so on. Click pressure not dependent on color if you want to turn any kind of cavity painting off. Alright, so now let's go to our file menu. These are pretty common. The only thing it's not is this export to is generally for AppLink connection plugins. So it allows you, if you've created something in 3D Coat from scratch, if you're starting from 3D Coat, this will allow you to directly export straight to the application that you have an AppLink for. Some of them do not have this type of functionality. The assumption is that you're starting from those applications and you're bringing assets into 3D Coat and want to thereafter send it back. But some do allow you to go both ways, regardless of where you're starting from. Okay, so install extension. If you've downloaded a brush pack or model pack or something like that from either the forums or the main page under the download section, you can install it here. You can create one. You can browse through different assets. Save, obviously. Merge object essentially is going to bring it into the scene without actually disturbing what you already have. If you were to just straight up import, it's going to basically clear out what you already have and replace it. So if you don't want that to happen, make sure to merge instead. Edit, undo, redo, mesh and texture resolution. Per UV map, you can go back in and change the resolution after the fact if you need. And these cover working with Photoshop. Edit all layers in external editor. We'll take all the layers you have here, send them straight over to Photoshop. It will actually fire up Photoshop for you, or GIMP, or any other image editing application. And what you do is you point to the file that loads that application, or it starts it up by going to the Preferences panel under the General tab, right here, External 2D Editor. You need to point wherever that's located. Okay, so going back here, edit projections. So if you want to send a particular, maybe a camera angle like this, send it over to Photoshop as is, paint this projection. That's really what 3D Coat's doing, is just projecting the texture that you see here as if it's just a flat image, and it's sending it over to Photoshop. You can apply a decal or something to it and save the file. When you come back to 3D Coat, it will basically reproject that back onto your textures. At least that's my understanding of it anyway. Project through allows you to paint all the way through the model. Yeah, external editor projection scale. There is a video on the 3D Coat YouTube official YouTube channel that goes into greater detail about this, and essentially it's based on your viewport resolution. Instead of relying on what you may have in your screen, you can elect to have 3D Coat magnify the scale so you can get to a better texture resolution. Okay, you can save and load hotkeys. Customize UI. There's a video as well in the features, feature demo section of the 3D Coat YouTube page. But just in a nutshell, you can click that and uncheck items or tools that you know you don't use or very rarely use, and it will hide those in the interface. So that way you can keep it as clean and uncluttered as possible, and you don't have to wade through a bunch of different tools. It also affects anything with a little drop list like this, okay, or brushes. You can choose what to display or not display. Once you have made your changes, go back to Customize UI, click on it, and you're done. Okay, Preferences, we'll cover that panel here shortly. View, go back to the paint room, and you can see it as I click on it. Relief only, so you can better examine your normal map relief or displacement map relief. Flat shade, pretty self-explanatory. Most of you know what this is for. Basically, so that only the diffuse color is showing. That way you don't have any shadows or specularity, anything that's occluding details that you otherwise want to know is there. Okay, and specular only, if you want to work with your specular maps in the same way that you would do with the flat shade. Backface culling. Basically, when that is checked, it will hide the backside of your polygons. Sometimes you may want that, sometimes not. With it unchecked, it will display both sides of a polygon. Okay. Let's go show displaced mesh. Especially handy if you're in micro vertex mode. Wireframe, as you can see. Let me go back to smooth shade. This is the default, and you can see the wireframe is already turned on. It's the 4 key, so you can toggle back and forth between the two. Okay, low smooth shade, environment shade. And this one, if you have loaded a panorama or background image, then you can use this environment shade. The grid, we'll just remove that if it's in your way. You can adjust the grid size as well. Axis, same thing, pretty self-explanatory. And you can assign a hotkey to it if you like. Separate axis if you want to show only a certain axis. Grid 2D mode. It's more apt to use in the voxel sculpting room if you want to use 2D paint or something like that. And you can opt to have it snap to the grid points. It's especially handy if maybe you want to do rectangular type of items where you can have it snap to sharp edges here. So we may cover this when we get to the voxel sculpting room. All right, I'll turn that off. Show voxels in paint room. So if you want to do voxel or / vertex painting, you want to check that so that you can see it in the paint room and edit it. Orthographic projection, same as this little icon. Number 5 on your 5 on your number pad, I should say. Okay, toggle full screen. It's Alt-Enter, and it basically just kind of removes this, gives you a little bit more real estate. This is really not a lot of difference. Adjust subpatching. Okay. Textures, import. Many of these are self-explanatory. You can import a diffuse map that you already have on your hard drive. Layers color is basically from the Photoshop file. Specular map you can import. Emissive, if you already have a glow map, you want to import that. emissive intensity, basically like a an alpha map where it reveals greater levels of glow intensity than others. And the same applies on export. Many of these are identical. So adjust is very similar to having the adjustment panel in Photoshop. So for example, if I wanted to blur or apply smoothing to a particular layer, then I could do that. I'm sorry. Adjust, smooth current layer, or I could sharpen current layer. You also have the option to use with this adjustment brush, like burn, saturation, desaturate, dodge, these types of tools. Smoothing, sharpen, and so on. Okay. Import UV. For example, if you have a model that you have only modified the UV and you've not done any modifications to the mesh itself, then you can import UV, and 3D Coat will try to essentially relocate the pixels from original position to its new position. Export UV, basically it'll export an OBJ file with a UV. Texture UV editor, we've already seen that here. Texture baking tool, especially helpful if you want to bake texture work that you've done on a high resolution model onto a lower resolution version of that model. And there is a video that covers that in greater detail on the YouTube channel in the feature section as well. Okay, so you can check the corresponding options, hit OK, and it will, wherever you pointed to that low poly model, 3D Coat will bake that texture onto it. And you'll find the textures in the same directory. Okay. You can bake occlusion, and symmetry is the same as hitting the S key. You can bring the symmetry panel to you. You can turn symmetry off. You can apply it across. Let's go ahead and show the symmetry plane, or you could turn it off if it's obscuring your view. Layers, same as layers panel, blending panel, new layer. Many of these are located in the right-click menu or in the little icons here at the bottom of the panel. Okay, erase, unfrozen, fill unfrozen, fill by mask. Symmetrical transform, same as this tool. Okay, and you have a couple different options here. If you have texture on one side, you want to flip to the other side or copy to the other side, you can do that. Go back to the rig brush tool. Okay, and you can import color layers from Photoshop files. Import specularity files in depth, and you can export the same. Freeze is much like the freeze tool in voxel sculpting. Basically, you are doing it just as the name implies. You are freezing it from being being editable. Okay, and I'll go ahead and show that by clicking on the freeze icon. You can go ahead and paint an area, and because I had ignore backfaces unchecked, it went all the way through. But if I had it checked, it would only freeze what the camera can see. Alright, and I can unfreeze material by the different sub-object or sub-material. Okay, you see how that works. or I could unfreeze all. And you could erase, you could invert. Again, many of these are self-explanatory. So if you need to use freezing, like I said, you can dive right in and start using these. Restore freezing state, and so on. Hide is not quite the same. Now again, freezing just prevents you beforehand from modifying anything. And as you may imagine, it has its own applications. Sometimes you may want to do something after the fact, and you have a ability to apply a layer mask. Hopefully in the future it will be a little less complicated trying to apply layer mask. When I go through the paint room tools, I'll try to demonstrate that, but in this video we'll just stick to just cursory overview of the tools. So let's get back to the hide tool here, and what it does, same thing as clicking on this little icon here. And what you can do, if you have this paint single polygon selected, I'm going to hit my 4 key to turn my wireframe on, and I'm going to make sure ignore back faces is checked. And if I want to hide certain polygons, this may allow me to get to a portion of a model to paint that would otherwise be difficult. And you can unhide all, or by material, and so on. So many of these are very similar to using the freeze tool. Windows, pop-ups, we've looked at most of these, and the others are relatively self-explanatory. You can reset to defaults, all pages to defaults. You can store this individual page layout. You can restore it. Same thing with workspace. Basically all the layouts, it will store it to an external file. Help menu, 3D Coat manual. You can click on that. I won't do that just to save time. But one of the more handy features is if you're having a problem or you're trying to demonstrate something that you're having difficulty with, in the application you can Alt-Shift-S, okay, or click this upload screenshot, and this will send basically a screenshot to the server. It help expedite the whole process. That way you don't have to jump into Photoshop and go through that whole operation. Okay, and this way you can share that image on the forums or with support. Same thing with send file to support. If you're having a problematic file, you can send up to 1 GB to support the 3D Coat just by clicking here. Yeah, all the rest of these are relatively self-explanatory. You can render turntables, upload turntables to YouTube, and so on. So let's go into the preset panel here. I'm going to pull this off and take a deeper look. You can see different sections here based on the workspaces, the paint room, the voxel room, and the surface is within the voxel room, but it has a whole distinctive set of tools, so it has its own section. So whenever you're in that workspace, if you have a tool that you commonly use and settings that you want to preserve, 3D Coat will do that, and it will list not only the tool but also the type of brush or selection tool, as well as the brush alpha. You can also designate what to store and what not to store. You can add a preset if you're in a particular room. So what I'll do is add preset, and you'll notice 3D Coat smartly placed it in the appropriate category. You can rename, add to quick panel, update the preset, add presets from file, and so on. You can save them so that if for some reason during an installation you don't want that to be overwritten, you can save to make sure that you can always get back to it. So yeah. Now this update or add to quick panel, that's the spacebar. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me go to the voxel room. If I hit the space bar, basically I have these tools available to me, but the quick panel is at the top. Right clicking, add to the quick panel will allow me to place it wherever I want inside there. Okay, go back to the paint room. And now let's look at the preferences panel. Okay, under the general tab, we're currently in a beta stage, so when you view this, we may already be in version 4. You check this. Autosave, relatively self-explanatory. You can adjust the amount of time between saves and the number of autosave files. Okay, again, 2D editor, you can point to wherever the 2D editor that you're using. It doesn't have to be Photoshop. It can be GIMP or Corel Paint or something like that. And again, these are self-explanatory. Normal maps, you have presets if you're working in Maya or 3D Studio Max, Lightwave, and so on. Padding, you can adjust that here. Remember, own brush shape and strip for every tool. Okay, show hints at the bottom, or show hints basically in the interface. You can leave that checked. Show big hints at the bottom, leave that unchecked if you don't want them always showing up here. Hide left tools panel is the same as clicking this little toggle, and it'll leave the tool panel hidden. And we'll go on to the viewport. If you want to load a environment sphere map, you can load that here. And these again are self-explanatory. Brushing, the high brush with caps lock. Basically, when you hit the caps lock key, as you begin painting, this little brush radius, okay, will get out of your way. It'll hide temporarily while you're brushing, and as soon as you let off your mouse, it will reappear. 3D connection device options. Theme, you can change the color scheme as you like, save it, and reload it at any point in time. Many of these are self-explanatory. The wireframe color you adjust here, the background color, and so on. The grid color you can change. Borders, you can adjust those here, and so on. Hit OK. Okay, so that should cover this general look at the user interface in 3D Coat. We will continue from here by going into the different rooms and expounding on the tools themselves in greater detail. Okay, so stay tuned, and thank you for watching.